My name is Karen Lattin, and I'm on the board of Los Paseos Neighborhood Association, and we want to thank you for all coming out to listen to the most recent updates on high-speed rail plans for the Monterey corridor. Quite a bit has changed from the last year. When I think the last time we were discussing this was about November of last year, and I think it's changed quite a bit on every level. High-speed rail has just, has it been finalized? So the 2018 business plan has been finalized and adopted, and the city has come out with, they finished their study on city-generated options, and so we're going to hear about the business plan from Boris Lipkin, who's the Northern California Regional Director, sorry about that, and Brian Stanke of the Department of Transportation will be talking about the two city-generated options. And we're going to actually hear from Maribel from Councilman Jimenez's office first. She's going to say a few words. He was planning to be here, but he had a last-minute change in his schedule. So I'm going to hand it over to Maribel, and then we'll get started.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. I hope you all are doing well. Thank you so much for joining this important conversation. So as you know, Councilmember Jimenez has been working to really hear your concerns. We did a high-speed rail District 2 meeting specifically just to hear about your concerns, what's important to our residents here in District 2. I wanted to let you know that I went ahead and printed out copies of the city's letter to high-speed rail in regards to the 2018 business plans. They are in the back table, and they're copies for you to take. That includes, and Councilmember Jimenez made sure that we included some of the comments and remarks that you all have made in terms of alignment. So a couple of those items that are in the 2018 business plan including the City of San Jose Community Working Group alignments, which includes specifically in District 2, a trench, a tunnel, and an underpass to 101. So we did hear some of your concerns that, you know, we want to have an alignment that has as less of an impact to our neighborhoods here. And so Councilmember Jimenez wants to let you all know that that is what we're working towards. We worked with the Department of Transportation, the mayor's office, and of course other council offices to make sure that when high-speed rail is investing enough money in San Jose, that they include some of the alignments that our consultants have done, and that we have as less of an impact as we can to our neighborhood. So we are 100% hearing you, and we are behind you. And any other questions that you have, you can feel free to reach out to me. I left some of my business cards in the back table with the letter that the city wrote to high-speed rail. So thank you so much for being here.
To get introduced, my name is Boris Lipkin, and I've stepped in as the acting Northern California Regional Director, as Karen mentioned. And I certainly appreciate everyone being here tonight. We'll kind of give an overview similar to what we did at the Community Working Group, where Karen represents the Los Paseos Neighborhood Association on that committee. And we'll introduce a little bit of kind of where we've gone to and where we're at right now, kind of bring everybody up to speed over what's been done over the last 6 or 8 months between both the High-Speed Rail Authority and I think I'm supposed to be a little bit closer. Is this better?
Yeah, that's better.
Sorry about that. We'll work out the kinks on the AV side. And kind of what the city's generated and the conversations that we're continuing to have and looking at some of those options and how we move forward within alignment with the city. So to kind of give an overview of what we're going to cover, we're going to just start with a little bit of the background and kind of how we got here, a little bit of the context from where things have been, what's happened. Then I'll turn it over to Brian from the city to kind of give an overview of the city-generated options. and then I'll take it back and introduce our 2018 business plan, cover what was introduced in that document, as well as give a quick summary and overview of the Caltrain business plan. This was something that was presented at the community working group. They unfortunately weren't able to join us today, but they said that they would be back with more information as that process kind of gets developed. So you can kind of see some of the ongoing planning work that's going on in the corridor, and I'll kind of close with just a little bit of how all the pieces tie together as we're working through kind of a lot of this both planning and alignment selection processes. So in terms of a few things that have happened with the authority, to give kind of one part of the update, we have had a bit of a leadership change. So we have had new leaders come in Sacramento. Still not loud enough.
Just keep it there.
I'll keep it right in front of my mouth, if that's better. Sorry about that, folks. So Brian Kelly has stepped in as our new CEO. He was formerly the Secretary of Transportation for the state. And he's kind of really stepped into this role because he really sees the importance of this project to the future of transportation in California. Very quickly, so he stepped in February, and he very quickly brought on a Chief Operating Officer, Joe Hedges, who's really focused on how we deliver the system, how we learn from some of what we've been doing so far, and kind of start to work on having a program delivery organization and improving some of our internal processes. And then Pam Mizukami has stepped in as our new Chief Deputy and kind of also supporting Brian and Joe and part of the leadership team. And then in Northern California, our former Regional Director, Ben Tracosis, left the authority for another opportunity, and so I've stepped in as the acting Northern California Regional Director, and we're starting to ramp ourselves back up a little bit here in the region. To kind of give a bit of kind of the background and history of where we were in 2017, these were some of the alternatives that we were looking at in San Jose. So kind of starting from the northern part of the city, we were looking at a couple of different options, north of Diridon, going into a viaduct and aerial structure over the existing tracks for the high-speed rail platforms, then continuing the aerial over 280-87 before coming back to grade, south of the existing Caltrain Tamian station, and then either coming back onto a viaduct in the middle of Monterey Highway, or in between, or in a grade alignment between Monterey and the Union Pacific. Now, those were what we had. This is sort of context setting of where we had left off. So this is not. We've continued to look at things both the city has as well as we have. And that's part of what we introduced in the 2018 business plan, is kind of starting to move beyond some of this. So this is just to kind of bring everybody up to speed of where we left off last time that we were here. What we've done over the last 6 or now I guess it's 9 months or so, we've developed a 2018 business plan, and that was something that was submitted to the legislature in late May. And so I'll talk about what that says and what it means. We've worked with Caltrain on developing kind of the blended corridor service plans and concepts. So really looking at how the two systems work together. Some of that was mostly focused north of San Jose, so San Jose to San Francisco. But as you'll see, we started to look at extending that blended system concept down further south. And so I'm going to kind of steal a little bit of my thunder in terms of what I'll be talking about. In terms of starting negotiations with Union Pacific, what we're talking about there is looking at extending that blended system down from San Jose all the way to Gilroy using the existing Union Pacific corridor. And so that really starts in terms of some of the concerns about impacts, really being able to minimize some of those by staying within that existing corridor and looking at sharing tracks between us and Caltrain there, kind of in a similar blended system with a freight track next to it. So Caltrain has also been doing a lot of work, and so since they're not here, I'll talk a little bit about it. They've continued to advance their electrification project, so they're doing a lot of work to modernize the corridor. We've been part of that effort with them as well in terms of bringing modern electric trains into the service between San Francisco and San Jose for what they've got there, and then they've started to develop their business plan and their approach, and that's kind of their next big planning document that will look at sort of the long-term service vision for how the systems work together. And then the city, and again, Brian will be able to talk more to this, but has developed and refined some of their city-generated options. So looking at additional alternatives, and we've started a lot of planning efforts with the city, with Caltrain, with the Valley Transportation Authority around Diridon Station, and looking kind of at what the long-range vision is for the station. How does that neighborhood really become kind of a world-class destination and neighborhood for the city? So today's topics, Brian will cover the city-generated options, and those were kind of done as a in the reaction to some of those 2017 alternatives that I sort of briefly mentioned. And as you'll see, kind of the concepts that were developed there, we're talking about extending some of the blended system further south through the city. We've continued to take that concept and kind of build on that, and looking at extending that even further down. And so we're kind of very much trying to achieve some of those same, very similar objectives in what we're putting forward as well as what the city has developed. And so we're working with them to kind of see how those will all work together. I'll give an overview of the business plan and this new concept, and then I'll quickly mention a little bit on Caltrain's business plan. But again, they'll be back with more information on that side. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brian for the city-generated options presentation.
Thank you, Boris. Once again, Brian Stanke, City of San Jose DOT, and I'll be discussing the city-generated options for high-speed rail through the city of San Jose. As Boris was discussing, 2016 business plan, the authority moved their focus from extending south first to going north to San Jose as the first priority, and really began a lot more intensive planning and environmental process. Had a range of alternatives here showing the sort of aerial viaduct options up north, and the aerial viaduct and at grade next to UP in the south. As the city began to engage with high-speed rail, we viewed those plans, provide comments, hear concerns from the community. We realized in 2017 that in addition to that ongoing public outreach and comment to the authority on their plans, it would be fruitful for us to go look at it from the city perspective. Are there other viable options and concepts that could be developed into alternatives for high speed through the city? So that brings us to the sort of main goals of the city-generated options. And really it's looking at creating financially and operationally feasible alternatives for high-speed rail that could be included in their project environmental review process and be evaluated and potentially become part of the project. In those alternatives, we're looking at minimizing the impacts that were concerned to the community, residents, and businesses, and then making sure that it is beyond being physically possible, that we also provided a capacity for both existing operations, future high-speed rail, and potential improvements to local regional rail. So as this slide shows, City of San Jose has over 20 miles of high-speed rail alignment through it. It's one of the longest distances through any city in California. It goes from the northern border in Santa Clara through downtown, across Tamian, through the Cotton Communications Hill, along Monterey Road, and then down through Coyote Valley to Morgan Hill, with a lot of different neighborhoods, a lot of different impacts in different contexts. So the city-generated options, we really mix and match the type of alignment, the type of design, the vertical alignment to match the context of the neighborhood. In the interest of time, I'm just going to run through the entire 20 miles first, and then we'll do questions and discussions afterwards. So starting north to south, the area around Diridon Station. Here, referring back to that earlier slide, high-speed rail is looking at either a short or long viaduct to an elevated station at Diridon. We're looking how can we provide the increased capacity needed while minimizing property and visual impacts. And so the idea, the proposal that we came up with is rather than ending the blended system somewhere between the city border and 880, continue blended service through Diridon, keep it at grade to around Taylor Street, and then going to a slightly elevated station, which for reasons I'll discuss later. And that way you can fit in the existing Caltrain right-of-way mostly, you cut back a lot on the property impacts, and reduce the visual impacts as well. We'll do the questions at the end, yeah. So, as some of you may be aware, in 2016, High-Speed Rail actually proposed Diridon at grade, and then in 2017, they were looking at it. There was a lot of constraints that weren't making it feasible. So, the big issues were, you can see here, Caltrains and Capital Corridor trains. I take the Capital Corridor every day, great train, but they come in Diridon, let people off, and often will park for hours at a time. Same with Caltrains, but half of them go through, the rest will stop, park a while, head back to either the yard or head north. And that really constrains the capacity of the station because you have all these parked trains, and it also creates all the cross traffic going back and forth. So the proposal the city had to sort of unlock more capacity is making it a through station. Here's just a quick comparison. I don't know what happened to the graphics on the right side, but that's Diridon Station. It has 9 tracks, currently about 112 trains a day. On the other side, it's the Leon Part 2 station. It's a high-speed, blended high-speed and regional station. It has over 500 tracks on just 500 trains on just 2 more tracks. So if you operate Diridon as a through station, no trains stop and park, they don't turn around, they run straight through, stop 2 minutes, keep going whatever direction you started from. You really can run a lot more trains through Diridon without adding a lot of extra traffic. The city's proposal for how to do that basically involves taking all of those trains that either park at Diridon or north of Diridon from Caltrain and Capital Corridor and moving them down to this shared regional facility, which would be located just above Capital Expressway, so where the drive-in theater and quarry are. And that way you can move all the storage from the Caltrain yard, from Diridon Station, and from the H yard down there. And that way trains aren't stopping reversing at Diridon. They just go straight through, and then they do all their turnaround and their stops down at Capital Expressway. Currently, Diridon is also an east-west barrier since the tracks are at grade or a slight curve. You got to have to put the fencing on so people aren't walking across those tracks. That's obviously a safety issue. But at the same time, you end up with these barriers where you might be 20 feet from the platform, you have a security surround around it, and even today, if you go, the undercrossing is very congested. If we start doubling the number of Caltrains with electrification, the other services, we add high-speed rail on top, we add all the development by Google's and others on the east and west side, we get a very overcrowded situation. So, to improve the east-west connectivity, the idea is to slightly elevate the station and make it a through station for people. So just in this graphic, it's the Rotterdam station. I asked, can you see the train? Initially you're looking at the architecture and the plaza, but if you look really carefully, so I don't have a pointer, right about the second floor level is where the platforms and the trains are. And what that does is it allows you to pass under the platforms. You can either walk through, shop, do whatever. Under the platform safely, you don't need to fence them off because they're above you. And that way you get better connectivity from sort of the west downtown where the Google area is developing and the neighborhoods to the west of that. Another big benefit of slightly raising Diridon about 20, 30 feet is, in addition to the permeability north and south of the station, you have two options to go south. So either continue along the existing Caltrain right-of-way over San Carlos, Monterey, 280, and then along the existing height of the berm through Gardner, North Willow Glen, or you can do a variation of the high-speed rail aerial where you take all the passenger trains and loop around 280, 87, and then come back down to grade south of Taylor. Both of these options have benefits and drawbacks, a lot of trade-offs either way. But this provides you, with that station configuration, two options that you can evaluate and see the costs and benefits of each and make an informed decision on which. Next, we'll go to the central section. Here, it's at grade, very much like high-speed rail in 2017 alternatives. The only difference is rather than segregated high-speed only track, one Caltrain track, one freight track, it's blended service, so you have 3 tracks for high-speed Caltrain, all the other operators. And then we have the shared facility to the south where all of the trains, Caltrain, AA's Capital Corridor, go down to turn around in convenience. And that greatly improves the capacity for Caltrain and for the other operators. All right, now we're getting to the southern section, the Monterey Road corridor. So here the two options that high-speed rail was showing earlier on that slide. The aerial, which is 40 to 70 feet down the medium Monterey Road, or what's called at grade adjacent to UP. So since UP wasn't working with high-speed rail, taking 60 feet to the east of that was currently Monterey Road, and building high-speed rail at grade. So to address the right-of-way and visual impacts of those alternatives, the noise, we had sort of 2 options. But the general thrust is sloping down into a ramp around Capitol Expressway. You go underground along Monterey Road, so starting with the cut and cover tunnel, under Skyway, Brown Chenoweth, and then down to about Blossom Hill. And then from Blossom Hill, switching to a bored tunnel so we can go underneath without causing impacts to the surface, about 60 feet deep. Under Silverleaf, 101, Coyote Creek, Baston Ridge, and then coming up to grade around Metcalf Road. The hill slopes down to Metcalf Road, that's where the corner would be, and then running at grade, starting off east of 101, but as you go past the Metcalf Energy Center, you can transition to west of 101 depending on how you go through Morgan Hill. The idea is high-speed rail looked at like a trench or a tunnel all the way through the city. That was cost prohibitive. So by doing underground in the urban area, at grade in the rural areas, it makes it less costly. And then another option, we didn't just draw this out, but is to go along the same cut and cover tunnel, but instead of going to 101 to continue it under Tulare Hill, and then transition at grade through Coyote Valley. This would be to meet up with some of the high-speed rail alternatives along Monterey Road through Morgan Hill. And that covers sort of the CGOs as we developed them through early this year. And then now I'm available for questions, discussion on the city-generated options and concepts. Sorry, gentlemen, someone over here had their hand up earlier.
Well, I think I kind of got
okay.
I was trying to understand, I got here a little bit late, maybe somebody touched on the definition of blended. We keep using blended.
Okay, so along with the peninsula between San Francisco, and they were looking around the northern end of San Jose, high-speed and Caltrain use the exact same tracks.
Oh, okay.
And then they were looking in San Jose having high-speed only tracks, and then Caltrain and the other passenger rail using separate tracks. Am I getting this right?
Yeah, and I could just give a little bit of the background of sort of the history of the term, if you will. So before about 2012 timeframe, the high-speed rail system was sort of being planned as what's called a dedicated system. So basically where we would be separate from everybody else. So it's just the 2 high-speed rail tracks basically separate from everything else. And In the 2012 business plans, going back to some of those earlier planning documents, what we introduced is the concept of using, because basically there's already a plan in the works of electrifying the Caltrain corridor between San Francisco and San Jose. And so what we kind of figured out together was that we could essentially share those tracks, and that would be feasible because the speed differences in sort of these kind of urban corridors are not as big between us and Caltrain. And so you could share the same tracks and use the same corridor, and obviously then you could use the same infrastructure. So that's why we're contributing to Caltrain electrification, is because then we can eventually use that corridor ourselves as well. And so it's basically a way to make sure that we're minimizing some of those impacts by not having to build whole new infrastructure where there's already existing rail systems. And so that's kind of a really important concept that we sort of started down that path in 2012. I think the city continued down some of that path, and as given my presentation, kind of talk about a little bit, pushing that concept even further down. And so I think it's a really important question. I think hopefully that helps to understand kind of the two differences between sort of a dedicated alignment versus a blended corridor like what we're talking about here.
So take you, and then I think there's some questions in the back end as well. Go ahead.
I couldn't really make out where the streets and all are. So taking from Bailey to Burnham, that section in there, there'll be no, like your plan, there'll be no elevator. Is that correct?
Brian, could you repeat the question in the mic?
Sure. From Bailey to Burnell, there will be...
It's kind of on the right-hand side.
Yeah.
That's why I'm asking.
Yeah. So, under the kind of the 101 adjacent, this is a simplified version, but basically it's running at grade along the freeway most of the time. There would maybe places like Coyote Valley Golf Course Road, where it might need to go up to go over the street and then elevated, but then it would go back to grade. Crossing the Coyote Creek, obviously you need to be in a bridge to go over Coyote Creek.
But following 101, you got to reroute it over to 101.
So the first option would be to go in a board tunnel right around the Blossom Hill Caltrain station, reroute it under 101, and then come out east of 101 at Metcalf Road, and then it would go in either east of 101 or east of 101, transitioning at some point to west of 101. But this would only work if high-speed rail is going what they call the Morgan Hill bypass, which goes west of 101 through Morgan Hill. So if they were going to go down Monterey Road through Morgan Hill, then obviously our alignment would need to continue down Monterey Road through Coyote Valley. Or, which we haven't even looked at, we'd have to somehow get back to Monterey Road.
But at grade, not elevated.
Yeah, this would be grade.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to follow up on the same question. Just continuing down into Morgan Hill, I'm curious about the impacts on Morgan Hill. The folks, because there's not going to be a stop in Morgan Hill, correct? So wouldn't they also prefer that 101?
Yeah, when we were doing feasibility drawings with our consultant engineers, HDR, what we really drew out was this route. At the time, Morgan Hill was really trying to get an east of 101 alternative working for them. That didn't really gel for them with the consultant they had. So high-speed rail also had a west of 101 alternative that goes through Morgan Hill. So you'd have to switch from the east to the west side of 101 to meet up with that alignment going through Morgan Hill. So we, throughout the process, we were discussing with Morgan Hill city staff, because they hired their own consultant to look at different alternatives for going through Morgan Hill. Obviously, you can't have the train, go through San Jose at one point, and then it starts in Morgan Hill 2 miles, some other location.
Just kind of a quick follow-up on this and then my own question. This is just a city-generated option.
Correct.
The viaduct along Monterey is still on the table, right? Or is it dead?
That's a question for Boris.
Okay. You tell me it's dead.
Well, so we obviously have done a lot of work to study those alternatives, and so those will be alternatives that we're going to work through the process. What I'll talk about is sort of a new concept that we're starting to develop now, and I'm kind of stealing a little bit from my presentation a little bit, and then what kind of will have to happen, and that's what we're looking with the city as well as through some of these options. In terms of eventually we have to pick a preferred alternative, right? So at that point, that's when that decision gets made, and so they'll continue to be studied up to that point, and then at some point either they get one of those gets selected or another alternative gets selected.
And when is that decision to be made?
I think that we're probably still over a year out from now, so we're stuck.
And then my other question is, so I live on Villareal, and the underground options that come up somewhere around Villareal, is it going to be before or after, like near the energy plant? Because I know portals do get quite a bit more noise coming out, and so I'm wondering if the hill's going to be blocking it, or is it going to be before the hill blasting us? So that's kind of the location. I don't know if you have that in detail worked out yet or not, but I'm very concerned. I'm generally in favor of underground if that's possible, but if it comes out right where we live, it's actually worse for us. So.
Yeah. You caught me without all my homework. We actually had HDR draw out like a 1% feasibility drawings for this alignment. The one staying on Monterey Road, we didn't have the budget for them to draw that out. Don't have the slide here, but what we're planning for the portal at Metcalf Road is the slope actually. Basking Ridge Road ends, and then there's a hill, and then there's a second hill that slopes down to Metcalf. So you put the portal on that side. It makes the portal easier, and the noise bounces to the south. I would imagine the same with Tulare Hill. You'd want it on that south slope. It shortens the transition for the portal, and it bounces the sound to the south.
You threw in ACE drinking at one point.
Yeah.
And where does that fit? You said it ends at?
So currently, yeah.
What was the question?
You mentioned ACE would also end up.
Yeah. There we go. Currently, ACE comes from Stockton down through San Jose. They stop at the Oregon, and that's the last stop for passengers, but they actually run the trains down past Taming Station to Taming Yard or Michael Yard, people call it different things, and stop there. Right now there's some complaints about noise and idling because there's no power at that yard, so the trains need to idle to keep them air conditioned. So with the idea of the shared regional facility, the shared regional facility, all the storage from Caltrain Yard, from Capitol Quarter, which actually uses Giordano itself as a yard, and then from ACE at the Taming Yard, could be consolidated down basically with a glory of the driving through where I'm at, by Capitol Expressway.
And what about Amtrak? Is that Caltrain also?
So the Capitol Quarter trains, there are about 14 of those. Those are operated by Amtrak, and then this Coast Starlight comes once a day. That would just keep going once a day on the P track like it does today.
But I saw something that there will be Amtrak from San Jose 152 over to Merced. Is that part of any of this?
So there's two things. One, the San Joaquin Regional Rail Agency, which runs ACE and the San Joaquin, is planning to extend ACE. Now it goes from Stockton to San Jose. It will also go from eventually Merced to San Jose and from Merced to Sacramento. And then in Monterey County is also gotten money to extend a train service to Salinas. They planned it to be Caltrain, they planned it to be Capital Corridor, I think the current plans is to be one and then the other. So some sort of train will also be coming from Salinas, sort of up to San Jose, sort of like the east side. So Caltrain goes to Gilroy, extending it to Salinas.
So what about the Amtrak blending or whatever part of that plan is?
The city general option imagines that the tracks would be sort of two groups of tracks. One is blended passenger rail that's electrified that any of the high-speed regional rail could use. The other would be the track for UP and the Coast Guard, which they like to have their own track that they run their own schedule on. But they don't want it electrified, yeah. So I'm sure Caltrain could talk about the issues they had electrifying their tracks and UP wanting non-electrified tracks.
Yeah, ACE is also not.
Yeah, but they're able to run under the wires.
So there's discussion with Amtrak or no? As part of this blending.
Well, as with the city developed its plans, it talked to Caltrain, it talked to High Speed Rail, it talked to Capital Corridor, and it talked to ACE about the plans and about how they impact their operations and facilities. We haven't talked to Amtrak National about the Coast Guard line.
Or the Merced in San Jose.
That's ACE. Yeah.
That's ACE. No,
yeah.
Merced, not Stockton.
Yeah, ACE will actually extend to Merced.
Merced down 152.
Oh, no, up through
That's what I'm
Villareal.
talking about. There's
Actually, you know about this, Boris. So I think in terms of coming from Merced over 152 through the Pacheco Pass, that's us.
Okay.
So that's High Speed Rail.
So that's the question goes.
Yeah, so that's part of our plan, and so that's when we talk about sort of the valley-to-valley line, right? In terms of what we are doing, once we go past Gilroy, we go across through Pacheco Pass to the Central Valley to where we're building right now over basically in that area. So that will extend up to Merced for that part. Now, separately, and this is where kind of there's a lot of planning that's going on through kind of the state rail plan and by sort of several different agencies in terms of looking at some of what Brian was describing, expansion plans, right? So we're kind of making this connection through Pacheco Pass, and that's part of our system. There is the plan for ACE to extend down from Stockton to Merced and essentially meet us there, so that then you can have another variety of options and interconnections. So a lot of what the state rail plan really focuses on, which was also released this year, is how do all of these different rail systems that we have work together, integrate, so that it makes travel a lot easier. And so we're certainly a part of that, but there's this kind of multi-agency planning effort that's going on, being led by the California State Transportation Agency and Caltrans, of how all of these systems work together. And so there's these individual kind of elements to it, and then there's how it works as a system. Does that help to at least clarify some of it?
There's some knowledge about what's going on. That way, so high speed, I ride one track all the time through San Juan from Merced, but I can see the development of the...
You've seen our construction?
Construction plan, yes. So I was just wondering what the plan is, how soon that might be, because I drive now from San Jose to Merced.
Oh, okay.
And the San Juan thing. So I'm curious about that development.
Yeah, and this is part of kind of what we lay out in our business plan, so you're just asking the question ahead of time, but that's okay. And well, I don't know if there's more. Do you want me to cover that as part of my, when I get to present, then we can answer any other questions that Christy has first. Is that okay? You had a few more.
You mentioned the UP tracks.
Yeah.
My understanding is we're trying to avoid utilizing that corridor for all of this.
So, as of 2017, High Speed Rail was being told by UP for years and years not to touch. Sort of Union Pacific starts to own the tracks just north of the Capitol Station. So their plan was not to use the UP tracks sort of south of Cheney and north of Capitol heading south. And that's why they were looking. That's why they were looking at either in the aerial or building a new right-of-way right next to the Union Pacific right-of-way.
So they're not going to try and
so maybe
mash those together with UV.
Well, and again, that's kind of what's changed in terms of some of the constraints that we were kind of doing the planning work under. And so I can get to that. I'll also get to that question as well. So if you'll just be patient with me, I just want to make sure we get any other CGO questions. Sorry, I know in the order that you had a question.
I had a question about the blended option, and it seems like north of the red section, there's a blended option. Is there a reason that you can't do a blended option in the Monterey Road corridor there? I'm not against going underground. That's great, but I just wondered if you could avoid all that.
It's the same question. So I think if it's okay, I'll just give I'll talk a little bit about our business plan, and then if there's more questions on CGOs, I'm sure Brian will be happy to come out. That way, you guys kind of have all the information of what we wanted to come and talk about, and then we can answer questions together because I think it really helps to elucidate some of this a little bit more. So let me go to where were we? 2018 business plan. So just kind of, I'll talk about the business plan, what it lays out. I'd like to kind of take a little bit of a step back of sort of why do we have high-speed rail? Why did the voters tell us to build this system when they passed the bond measure in 2008? And there's sort of four main points that I think are kind of important to when we talk about kind of some of the benefits that high-speed rail brings. The first one is really focused on increasing some of the mobility and what it means what it takes to get around California. When we've looked at systems in other countries, what we generally see is for trips maybe under 50 miles or so, local transit and cars make sort of the most sense, and they are the best mode for those kinds of trips. For trips over 500 miles, it's usually planes that really have a big advantage. But in between that, there's sort of the sweet spot where high-speed rail really starts to make sense and have a lot of advantages compared to those other modes. And so between sort of that 50 to 500 mile range, that's where a lot of the distances between the cities in California are. And so that's sort of, I think, why there's sort of the idea of why high-speed rail really makes sense here with the geography that we have in terms of how it can connect parts of the state. The other part is sort of the reason that it's a needed alternative. So over the next 30 to 40 years, we're going to be adding the equivalent of the population of the states of Washington and Oregon to California. And so people are still going to have to travel. You're still going to have to be able to get to other parts of the state. And in terms of the amount of space it takes and the amount of capacity that it adds to the transportation network, we're not going to be in position to massively widen our highways. We're not going to be draining the bay to add another runway to SFO. So high-speed rail really provides an efficient use of both space and resources in terms of moving people around. We're also operating the system, we made a commitment to operate on 100% renewable energy. And so when we are a recipient of cap and trade funds, so we get a quarter of the proceeds from that program. And when the Air Resources Board, who administers the program, looked at the relative emission reductions from the high-speed rail system and all the other recipients of the program, even though we're just 25% of the funds, they projected that it's about 70 or 80% of the reductions that we see in terms of emission contributions. So those are big contributions towards the greenhouse gas emission goals of the state. And then finally, there's sort of the economics of the project. So when you start to tie places closer together, there's this concept in sort of urban economics of agglomeration economies. And so what that means is that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And so it's easier to find economic opportunities, business connections, by making travel easier and tying places together. So what we mean by that is really reducing some of the travel times. So right now, a trip between here and Fresno is about a 3 to 4 hour drive, depending on what happens to you on 152. That becomes a 60-minute trip. So that dramatically changes what those possibilities start to look like. Getting to Los Angeles is under 3 hours. And so in terms of, so I grew up in the Bay Area. I went to college at UCLA in Los Angeles. And so that just drastically changes kind of what those kinds of trips coming back, me at that time, going back and home, back and forth would mean. And there's, as I mentioned, there's a lot of effort in terms of the state rail plan of making those connections and really tying these systems together. And so those all build on each other. There's major investments that the state is making across the board in local jurisdictions in improving transit connections. And the high-speed rail system can sort of serve as the backbone for that and be the hub and that everything else kind of flows off of. And so we really see a lot of those opportunities in terms of how the state is trying to grow and what the investments are that are being made, not just in our system, but around the other parts of the state and in our cities. So where we're at is we have 119 miles under construction in the Central Valley. It takes about 2 hours to drive from our northern construction sites to where we are in the south. I don't know when the last time that we built 119 miles of anything, and that's just kind of our path of getting started. We've invested about $3 billion, and we've seen a lot of the economic benefits already generated from that in terms of economic activity in the Central Valley. We've got about 20 active construction sites, and we recently hit over 2,000 construction workers working on the project. So we're having really big economic effects up and down the Central Valley. As you know, right now we're doing a lot of bridge work. So basically, as these structures are going up, there's a lot of work that's going on. So getting into the 2018 business plan. So the business plan is something that we're required to do every 2 years. It's a plan that we develop and as an update of kind of where the program is at, what our current status is, what the issues are, as well as what the vision is going forward. And we submit it to the legislature we release it to the public, receive public comment. We've got about 500 public comments on the draft 2018 business plan. And then after approval, it gets submitted to the legislature. So it was submitted in late May, so it's just a few weeks old, and it's available on our website. Another part of the thing that it does is also updates all the key numbers, all the key metrics, capital costs, ridership forecasts. All of those are included as part of our business plan. Now, in my sort of previous role before stepping into this one, I was the Deputy Director for Strategic Planning, and so I was working on the last 4 of these business plans. So, because we do them every 2 years, and each one sort of builds on the previous ones, right? So, while there's always opportunities to introduce new concepts, like in 2012 we introduced the blended system concept, and we've introduced some new things. In this one, they kind of start to sharpen the focus and really start to get a better understanding of where we're headed, what we don't know about the system as we're working on it. But there's several things that kind of we continue to maintain throughout many of these business plans and are consistent between them. So the first thing is our kind of number one big commitment is focusing on delivering the phase 1 system. So the voters told us in 2008 that the phase 1 of the system would be from San Francisco to Los Angeles and Anaheim, and told us to start there. So that's our number one focus overall. We also continue the planning for phase 2, so those are the extensions up to Sacramento and then down to San Diego. But at the same time, what we've introduced in the last few business plans and kind of started the concept in 2016 is looking at where can we start service. And so we were talking about the Silicon Valley Central Valley line. In this business plan, we've kind of defined that as San Francisco to Bakersfield. It's a bit of an extension from what we had in the 2016 business plan, but we really see that as the place where high-speed rail really starts to take off. And then the other part that we're doing is continue to invest in our bookends. So those are kind of projects in the existing rail corridors that have benefits for the high-speed rail system when we're there, but also have immediate benefits for local partners. So that's something like the Caltrain Electrification Project that we're a part of here in Northern California, as well as a number of projects down in Southern California. What's new in the 2018 business plan is we've introduced the concept of phasing that Silicon Valley to Central Valley line. And so what we kind of see when we look at where we are in terms of our kind of long-range funding streams, which have some uncertainty tied to them, as well as our long-range costs, that when we kind of line those things up, we see that we can deliver 224 miles of high-speed rail infrastructure that can provide immediate benefits. So looking at that in 2 different lines. So one is in the Central Valley, so starting from where we're building in north of Fresno, basically around the Madera area, down to Bakersfield. And that connects up to the San Joaquin service and allows for those connections up to Sacramento and then over to Oakland. As well as looking at the San Francisco, extending the electrification project, again, from right now down to San Jose, going all the way down to Gilroy. And then we can look at starting early services, and that's what we're going to be exploring over the next couple of years. What that leaves for us is really that focus on our other mega project. Everything that we do is a mega project, but the Pacheco Pass tunnels. So that's the section in purple in the middle of the map. And so that is about over 10 miles of tunnels that we have to build. It's a huge project all on its own. And that's, we have a funding gap to be able to fund that, but we're also looking at ways to lower the risk. We're doing geotechnical studies, looking at the soil there, and really trying to improve the design to be able to deliver that. I mean, frankly, while we haven't built those kinds of tunnels in California, those kinds of tunnels have been built around the world, and so we know it's feasible, and we're trying to bring in some of that expertise to help us in getting that done. And so our goal is to basically have that San Francisco to Bakersfield service done by 2029. We want to continue to prioritize the extension to Merced as we talked about. And then what we lay out in the plan is that from a kind of a technical feasibility standpoint, we can get to Los Angeles by 2033, but that's not fully funded. So we have a lot of funding to still get to in order to finish that extension. But we really see being able to start providing a lot of benefits kind of on these interim services that we can start with, and then as the Valley to Valley line gets developed. So in San Jose, as I mentioned, we kind of introduced this new concept of extending the Caltrain electrification project to Gilroy. And so what we mean by that, and going into some of those questions about the UP corridor, Brian kind of started to mention this a little bit, where over the past few years, when we had asked them, can we basically stay within, use your corridor, use of the property that they have, they had always told us that that wasn't an option, that they didn't want to entertain us being there with them. And so that's why we often ended up next to them, and that obviously has impact. So they've really kind of changed their tune over the past about 6 to 9 months. And so we've been in active discussions and negotiations with them about being able to use the corridor. And so what that would look like is we would have 2 electrified tracks. That would be for us and for Caltrain to be able to use. So Caltrain could basically also run electric service all the way down to Gilroy at that point as well. And then there would be a freight track next to it. So that in terms of some of the objectives that we were trying to get through with that is really looking at some of the same questions that Brian was looking at in the CGOs, in terms of trying to minimize the impacts to both private property impacts, as well as impacts to existing infrastructure. Obviously, staying in the existing corridor really has a lot of those kinds of benefits. So this was sort of a new concept that we've introduced. We still have a lot of work to do in terms of studying it, looking at the details of how we start to lay it out, all the engineering work that's still in front of us. But we really see a lot of promise, and so that's something new that we introduced that we want to make sure that we share and kind of be able to describe to people and we'll have more information on it in the coming months. I won't cover the Caltrain business plan just yet. I have a couple. Maybe I'll mention quickly the Caltrain business plan in my last kind of slide about how we all work together, and then I'll just go over the questions at that point. So Caltrain, they also presented a community working group, and we asked them to come here as well. But they've started a process of developing a business plan of their own. The focus of their business plan is sort of developing the long-range service vision for the corridor. So as you look out, what is the future of Caltrain service, both kind of, between San Francisco and San Jose, but now including, potentially service down, between San Jose and Gilroy, look like as you go out? And do you want to, continue to grow that service? Do you want to maintain kind of what we've talked about as a starting point? And then just a last slide, there's a lot of different ongoing kind of planning work that's happening. So the Caltrain business plan, as I mentioned, kind of will introduce kind of service concepts for the blended system. We introduced kind of this new UPRR corridor. The city looked at several potential alignments and alternatives. And then there's a big planning effort between us and the city, VTA and Caltrain, and looking at sort of the future of Diridon Station. And so there's a lot of work that we're all kind of coordinating on and want to make sure that we're that those are all working well together. Part of that will be kind of the refinement of alternatives for us to look at in the environmental document for what it means to introduce high-speed rail into the corridor. But it's sort of in the context of sort of looking at those long-range visions for what happens beyond just the introduction of high-speed rail, and that's what some of these other planning studies are really focused on. And with that, I'll open for questions, and I'm sure if there's anything else on CGOs that Brian will be able to join me for that as well. Sir?
Yeah, if we get electrification south of Villareal and 3 tracks, are there currently existing 2 tracks?
It's 2 tracks up to a certain point, and then it becomes 1 track.
Okay, so new tracks would have to be added?
Yes, but I think the key question, I might be rushing ahead to what your next question is, can we stay within the existing corridor?
Yeah.
That's what we're looking at. And obviously the objective is to do that.
that's kind of the overall.
Because I know where I live, which is right up against the track, so it's pretty tough.
Right, and we haven't done the detailed work of looking at it in every part of the corridor. It obviously has. Overall, we know that it's going to have a lot of potential to reduce some of those impacts by being able to, wherever possible, stay within the corridor. We know it's not going to be perfect because there's going to be places where 3 tracks, whether it's on a curve or something else, are probably even still will have trouble fitting. But that's the work that's in front of us. So we'll be doing that over the coming months. Yes, sir.
I got 2 questions. The first one kind of follows on, I think, what this gentleman was getting at is where is the concept of eminent domain going to come in to start affecting private and business locations and stuff like that? Because I heard a couple of rumors about, shall we say, impact on housing down, especially in the Morgan Hill area.
Well, so basically, if we don't fit in the corridor, right? If we're following the UP corridor, I mean, if we're developing a brand new corridor, we're going to have to acquire property, right? And so the eminent domain process, we always try to settle any negotiations that we have. So we're in the Central Valley where we're building. We have to acquire about 1,900 parcels of land for that construction. We've got about 1,300 of those, and so there's established kind of state processes for what that looks like and how it works and the compensation amounts that get aligned. Obviously, our preference is to not have those impacts in the first place. So that's what we're trying to get to. And so it's kind of similarly, in terms of if we can stay within the UP corridor as much as possible, it minimizes some of our need to require right-of-way outside of it. Now, again, we still have a lot of work to do to develop that and kind of look at those impacts, and we'll be doing all of those studies and work that's in front of us. But there is sort of, the established process of how right-of-way works and how acquisition happens.
The second question is, I love the red area where you're going to run tunnels. That happens to be down through the shallowest water table that you can possibly imagine. How are you going to accommodate that?
Well, it's his alternatives.
The city would take that as a city-generated option unless the board wants to adopt it as an So along Monterey Road, it would be a cut-and-cover tunnel, which could either happen under Monterey Road or under UP, if UP was possible. For what you do is you cut down, build a box, basically a concrete box, and then cover it with soil again. Actually, high-speed rails design guidelines are there's always have to be waterproof. So the box would be designed to be waterproof. So if the water table is above where the bottom of the box, it would resound straight. I'm not remembering exactly where the water table goes from lower to higher, but then when you get to Blossom Hill, that would be, you have to build. It's one of the trickiest areas that our consultants said they'd have to do further design on for feasibility. You have to widen the tunnel and then do 2 boring machines, and at that point you'd be boring through the soil, and you could go through saturated soil with a boring machine. And then when you get to County Valley, I think where the water table is the highest, that's where you'd be transitioning back to grade. But yes, it's a challenge, and actually high-speed rail requires that all the channels be waterproof.
I'm just continually amazed when they talk about development in Coyote Valley and whatever else. You go down there after rains and stuff like that, and the water's just seeping up to the surface. And people, you talk to people, and it just seems like they don't even consider how deep down that water table isn't.
Yeah, for the city-generated options, we were actually either at 101 or at grade in Coyote Valley, not Monterey.
That might be fun to watch.
In the back, sir?
Yeah. Instead of dealing with the challenges and expense of Pacheco Pass, have you guys looked at cutting over in Central Valley down on the Nosh area?
So I think that was looked at as part of our programmatic environmental documents. I know Roland's here; he's a big advocate of that one, and so I have to go back and look at kind of what the reason was that Pacheco was picked over Pinoche at that time. But that was looked at in sort of the way that the documents work is that you have sort of a programmatic analysis that looks at these kind of mega questions, and then you look at the detailed questions in a project level document. So that's what we're doing now. But that was something that was looked at as part of the programmatic.
Would it have been rejected on its own accord or in comparison to the test? And if so, did they know that they're going to have to build 10 miles of tunnels and tricky geology at the time they made that comparison?
I don't know, James, do you have more on this than I do in terms of some of the history and kind of how this alignment was done?
Hi, my name is James Tong. I'm the Deputy Regional Manager for this section. And just to elaborate on the answer that Boris provided, we did take a look at that alignment previously, but it was rejected because of one of high-speed rail's major criteria, which is to stay next to a transportation corridor. So to be next to a transportation corridor, that offers the flexibility of maintenance and better security operations, and for better construction, helps us provide electricity when we need it. And so for a whole host of reasons, that option was taken off the table.
But you built the road next to it.
Yeah, it's pretty weak reason.
But certainly correct. Correct. But wasn't that we initially voted on, that route, not this route here?
We initially voted on Altamont. Back in the day,
That's what I voted on, was Altamont Pass.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yes.
So the timing was in 2005 was the programmatic environmental document that picked the Pacheco Pass. That then got studied further in sort of there was a Central Valley to the Villareal that was done later, but that was already there at the time of the 2008 vote. So that basically how it was the phase 1 and phase 2 systems that were defined by the voters were defined based on sort of the Pacheco Pass being that path of it.
So you sold the bill of goods, and now you're.
Oh.
No, we're doing that. We're delivering and building and focusing on the same project.
A different product.
It's no Pacheco Pass.
But it's in a different color.
No. So, sorry, just to clarify, at the time we were looking at the Pacheco Pass at that time, and we're still looking at it now. It has not changed. I just want to be really clear. Yes, ma'am.
A couple details. Some might ask where the stops might be. Do you have an idea where those might be?
So the high-speed rail stops are all those kind of white dots on this map. So I know it's a little hard to read, and so I can kind of so the top one there on the left side, San Francisco, Monterey, San Jose, Gilroy, and then the top of the blue line is Merced, a stop in Madeira, Fresno, a stop in Kings Tulare, which is around Hanford area, and then Bakersfield, Palmdale, Burbank, Los Angeles, and then stops between LA and Anaheim and Anaheim. So that's phase 1. But then there's also kind of in the corridor here, there's obviously also Caltrain stations, right? So there's Caltrain service for things like, we talked a little bit about Morgan Hill earlier. So like Caltrain serves Morgan Hill, there's opportunities to look at what that service looks like in the future if we're electrifying the corridor. That starts to change that dynamic with the Union Pacific as well.
So San Jose, you say Dearborn Station?
Yes, San Jose Dearborn Station, yes.
And then the safety of the trains. I do ride there that weekly, going south and back, and they blow their horns, the train horns. They're required to do that at certain locations, streets. Go through Fresno right next to it. Something you can blow their horn because it disrupts city workers or something. So what about that? The noise that's required for safety?
Sure. So on basically the trains do have to blow their horns. There's what's called quiet zones that the city can apply for in specific areas. So what we would be doing is basically, because as part of that, you need to have certain investments in protection around the crossing. So having, for example, quad gates, basically instead of having one arm on one side and another arm on the other side, having arms on all four sides. In terms of some of those kinds of protections. Now, ultimately, that would be up to the city to decide if they want to apply for something like that in terms of quiet zones.
as part of kind of our analysis of the noise, we would also be looking at noise mitigation measures, what we could do to reduce some of those impacts.
So is that part of your city plan?
Yeah, just to add to that, Meryl mentioned that the city's letter on the high-speed rail business plan, and in that the city responded to this new concept for the blended and extension of electrification down to Gilroy, and that could bring a lot of benefits as far as increased service to all the other stations besides the Iredon station, that Capitol, Boston Hill, Tingley, but also the city's concerns about the plan for these grade crossings with a lot of new train traffic, because there's very little passenger rail traffic now, and the needs for the authority to look at some sort of grade separation options for that. So I think there are copies of the city letter over there.
Talk about the noise, the required.
Yes. I mean, all previous plans for high-speed rail, because it was dedicated south of, through the city, they were looking at grade separating everything. So we were looking at those impacts. But if they're not grade separating, there's safety concerns as well as noise concerns. We'd like them to look at. Yes.
Can you give me 1 minute to change this battery?
Brian, on the first part. So in sort of these kind of blended sections, we'd be looking to operate up to 110 miles an hour. Now there's curves and things that might make that lower in specific areas, but in sort of blended operations with quad gates, as I mentioned, 110 would be the maximum speed that we'd be looking to achieve.
Realize there are houses 30 or 40 feet, 50 feet off of the tracks along Monterey Highway.
Yes.
And
well, no, I mean, in terms of, I'll expand on that, right? Again, the impacts that we'd be looking at would be around the corridor in terms of what adding high-speed rail service to the corridor would do, and what we need in terms of noise and vibration in those elements, and we'd be looking at what we could do to mitigate those. That's the process that we'd be going through to reduce those impacts. And on the trench question.
Yeah, so again, the city-generated option is looking at a world where Union Pacific does not end up coming to an agreement with high-speed rail about sharing the right-of-way. High-speed rail put forward sort of two options, which is one, the aerial with the columns in the median, and we're talking 15 to 18 foot wide columns. Or at grade next to UP, since UP wouldn't share, with a brand new 60-foot right-of-way taken out of Monterey Road, which pushes Monterey Road to the east. So, you sort of have a trade-off there where to get rid of the property impacts, you need to put the rail on the ground. So you're really trading off long-term property impacts for rather large construction impacts. Whether you get an agreement with UP, we can dig under them and put them back on top, or we have to go on Monterey Road because UP won't let us dig under them. It would be years of heavy construction and disruption. On the same side, the high-speed rail at-grade alternative also dipped Monterey Road under multiple intersections in Branham, Chenoweth, Skyway. So that would be lowering the street 30 feet and the cross streets 30 feet. So that also had construction impacts. So no matter which way you went, there would be large construction impacts. But probably digging a cut-and-cover trench tunnel under Monterey Road would have severe impacts until the construction's done and you can put it back together.
So Ron, are you saying that if you said something at the beginning about if UP doesn't negotiate, does that mean, or if UP does negotiate, that means the city generated options are completely gone? Or are you still considering them? Are the three options still being considered individually regardless of the UP thing, or is it only if UP doesn't negotiate that the city-generated options will move forward?
Well, and that's something we're working with the city on looking at in terms of what we move forward with. That's some of the work that we're doing right now. I think we had a conversation about it last week and this week, to be totally frank. Probably next week too. And so we're looking at that. I mean, what we kind of see is in terms of achieving many of the same objectives that the city was trying to achieve. I think we get there, frankly, with a lot of what the UP corridor offers. Now, I think if the UP corridor goes away, there's, that's a different situation, and then we really need to reassess. I think there's also specific elements of the CGOs that kind of push the envelope forward beyond just, what it means to introduce high-speed rail into the corridor. It really talks about kind of the future of the rail corridor as a whole, the future of the station, and so we're also part of those conversations as well. So there's sort of those different pieces, and that's what we're really looking at together and seeing how we move forward.
And you think that's about a year now?
Well, I think in terms of the decision on how we move forward is a lot closer than that. I think the decision on the preferred alternative is about a year out. Yes, sir.
So, bringing up just expanding that point, why not just eminent domain OBD for a start? And also, one point that I was actually wanting to come to was how far along specifically between the Gilroy and San Francisco. Where is the level of commitment funding? Are we just talking about options on how to do it the best way? Or are these potential plans that aren't even going to happen after the midterms anyway?
No, so, okay, there's sort of two questions that you asked. One is about eminent domain with UP. Yeah. So, and James, correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, but how I understand it is that, so we're a federally licensed railroad, basically, as is the Union Pacific. And so it gets very complicated in terms of our ability just to essentially force them to sell to us. That was, frankly, I don't know if that's feasible. And from what I understood from before, from kind of having asked this question before. So that's why we're sort of beholden to what, both previously kind of being next to them instead of buying them and now negotiating with them and trying to strike a deal rather than being able to just unilaterally make that decision.
It's playing nice, and right now they're just having completely over part of the battle. They can do whatever the hell they want.
Do you want to?
I just want to describe. I'd just like to describe the type of railroad that we're working with. So UPRR is a Class 7 railroad, and so in railroad terminology, that really means UPRR has a lot of federal protections that high-speed rail doesn't really have. The federal government is actually dependent on UPRR as an interstate railroad because there's a lot of tax revenue that comes out of the business that UPRR generates. And so for that reason, high-speed rail cannot use eminent domain on UPRR.
Okay. It sounds like if they're using federal funding, it sounds like it should be a blend of some mechanism.
Well, they're not federally funded, so they're a private company that has sort of special federal status. Okay. So it gets complicated to the legal side, frankly. It's beyond at least my understanding of the legal side, but it's not something that seems feasible. And then to your second question, why we kind of talked about phasing the valley-to-valley line and looking at sort of these two separate segments is
the Gilroy, San Francisco.
Gilroy, San Francisco.
Just the best way of doing it. Essentially, these plans just completely going to fall apart.
Well, so I'm answering the. Let me get to this part. The reason that we're talking about these two sort of opening lines first is based on a reflection of the cost and the funding. So in terms of when we look at the funding that's been made available to us from the federal government, from the Bond Act, and from Cap and Trade, those are our main kind of public funds that we're using for this. When we look at sort of what that gets us, it gets us those two segments, and then we have a funding gap to close on going through Pacheco Pass. So that's kind of, those are long-term sources, so there's ranges applied to those, and so depending on what Cap and Trade shakes out to be over, the coming years, that might change in terms of where we're at, but that's kind of the assessment as of the 2018 business plan.
To respond to the previous two questions about what happens to the city-generated options now and the UP question, again, it's something in the city's letter, but we don't yet have, high-speed rail doesn't yet have an agreement with Union Pacific, so the city is concerned that We'd like to see that go forward, but if it doesn't, then what becomes the range of alternatives in the south? So the city is interested in the generated option for the south continuing in the process unless that deal happens, and then we've also laid out our concerns with the business plan concept and things like grade separations as well. Yes. Okay.
So are we back to viaducts following that scenario?
We haven't played out those scenarios.
We haven't even played that out.
Yeah,
but it's still an option that High Speed Rail Authority is looking at.
Yes, because again, just in terms of where we are in the process, there's been a lot of work and we have to carry a range of feasible alternatives. Those are feasible alternatives that we have already done a lot of work studying. And so we need to finish the study now. Again, in terms of this isn't tomorrow, but there will be a point where we pick a preferred alternative, and that's the point where either one of those does get picked or doesn't. Essentially, that's the decision point. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so what I understand is the city has 2 underground options, right? You only have 2, right? Okay. Yeah. South. We're looking at this area. And you have 1 that is biased, right? So we got 3 in this area, right? Is that right?
Well, so in our kind of previous alternatives that we were studying, we had two additional options through this area. One was a raised viaduct option that was in the median of Monterey Highway. One was basically a grade option between Monterey and the Union Pacific Railroad. So those are things that we've done a fair amount of work on already. The city introduced a couple of additional things that are different than that, and so those are the 2 kind of underground options. And then what we've now just introduced is the UP concept. So there's a lot of different varieties here.
Okay, so that's fine. Okay. Yeah. So if they don't agree, we still have the 2 underground, which we don't have any underground. Why don't you also consider going underground, Monterey, that they don't have to say anything about it? So keeping underground is the basic here. Everybody wants underground. So the other options we could even look at, which would go with underground. Where is it? At least the city is really proposing 2 really nice options. They should the High Speed Rail should look at those 2 options first before losing money on the other options. We want the city options.
When will you make a decision on the city options? High Speed Rail.
So that's really what we're doing right now. We're trying to get there as quickly as we can.
How are you doing that? What are you doing? How are you making those decisions?
So some of the work that we've done is really looking at them side by side in terms of some of those objectives.
Where in your meetings, or what's happening?
That's the work that we're doing together right now. So we don't have a final decision. We haven't reached the process. What we've talked about kind of out of the mayor's letter is also entering into agreement of how all of this gets worked out. So that's part of some of the ongoing efforts that we have to do, and kind of aligning all of these various efforts together. So that's what we're doing right now.
When will you find out the big obstacles to the city-generated options?
Sorry?
Well, do you see any big obstacles to the city-generated options of the tunnel?
So cost is obviously one.
Is it more costly?
Yes, it is substantially more costly. So, and it's not a small deal. I think there's also, and again, not to poo-poo it, because I think it tries to solve problems, and it's, so I don't want to say that there's, that it's a bad idea.
There's no cap and trade funding. We get a viaduct right through San Jose, right? If there's no cap and trade funding, because you can't keep mentioning that cap and trade is 25% of the foundation, the financial foundation. But as far as I know, there is no cap and trade market, especially with the Trump administration. Who's buying carbon?
So, and I think, okay, so maybe there's two various things.
Oh, I got a ballot here that says Altamont Pass. That's a ballot that I voted for. It says Altamont Pass. It doesn't say anything about going through Jacob Pass, down my front yard. Yeah. It says Altamont Pass. It's the ballot I voted for. I have it right here on my iPad.
In the financial option, what we voted on said that you would be self-sustaining and that you would have private investments, federal matching, and some local funding from bond measures. You've already blown through the bond measures. You don't have the matching funding is almost gone, and there's no private investment. The bond also, the measure also said that it would be self-supporting. You would have to sell $20 million $100 tickets to make your system self-supporting for a year. There's only 6 million people taking flights that year. There's only 39 million people in California. None of it really makes a lot of sense. So we want to know, what are we going to get out of it? We're going to wind up paying for it, right? It's going to come out of the city options will eventually probably have to be paid for by the homeowners. So we would actually like to be something that we benefit from.
Sure. So let me just talk a little bit about the funding, because I think, just to clarify a couple of things. So the bond measure, when it was passed, it basically was providing the seed money towards the program, right? It was $9 billion towards starting the high-speed rail. At that time, the cost estimate was $45 billion, so it was about a fifth. Now, what the bond measure told us is, in order to use it for construction, you have to find matching funds. So it has to be basically 50-50 matched from a different funding source. So the first set of matching funds that we got was through federal funds, through the Stimulus Act. That was about $3 billion. And that's what's helping fund between the bond measure and those funds, the construction of the Central Valley. In 2014, the legislature gave an appropriation of 25% of the cap-and-trade funds that the cap-and-trade program run by the Air Resources Board generates towards continuing the development of the program. So those are the next set of matching funds. When we look at sort of where we're at right now, we started with about 1/5. Now we have about 1/3 of the funds. It's not everything. We really do see kind of the important role of the federal government, in stepping up to help us over a long time. I don't know, we're sitting here in 2018. I don't know what the Congress looks like come January 2019. I don't know what the presidency looks like come January 2021. This is a long-term program. Traditionally, transportation programs have substantial federal shares. That's not our current situation. So our job is to continue to pursue those funding opportunities. The private sector also has a role, as you mentioned. We have to have a system that's self-sustaining on an operating basis. So we can't subsidize operations. That was one of the other key requirements of Prop 1A. That's why we're talking about starting service on the Silicon Valley Central Valley line, so that it's long enough to start to generate enough of those revenues by tying enough of the markets in the state and really having some of those travel time advantages. Now, while we're looking at some of these shorter segments, we don't know if we can do that. We don't know if we can meet that requirement on those. So that's what we're studying right now and looking at whether that's something that we can start to generate some of those benefits as early as possible. So we're meeting all of the requirements of the Bond Act. We're continuing to develop the system that the voters voted on. And the other part of it, the private investment that you mentioned, what we see is based on the revenue that's generated by the system, when we build enough of it, and there's an operating profit, basically, that's what gets monetized and where the private investment comes in to continue to expand the system further. So that's kind of the overall big picture financials. Now, it's a long-term program. We don't have every last dollar lined up. That's how nothing, no big transmission project happens that way. When you look at the BART extension to Silicon Valley, that one's also happening in phases as funds are identified as the program continues. So this is how transportation kind of gets built in the States.
To try to get more help from the federal government, have you thought about putting Trump's name on all the grants?
If that'll help, we'll certainly entertain that.
Yeah.
So what weight will you give the city options?
Sorry?
What weight will you give the city options when you're evaluating?
We're giving it serious weight now.
So that's part of my question. So I work in real estate, and we live near the crafts, so there's clients are looking for a home in the next 2 years or whatnot. So I don't know if you've done any studies on kind of the property value impacts as far as all the homes that are along that area. When it comes to city options, those would likely be far better for the tunnel as far as noise and as far as the visual impact of a central viaduct. So I don't know if you're not considering that, if you request, I think that's something you consider when looking at the city options.
So what we study as we look at kind of the impacts, we do study noise, we study visual impacts. Those are all part of the process. And then in terms of, the impact on home values, so first off, investment, being close to improved transportation corridors, has positive impacts as well as negative. We don't know what it ultimately shakes out to be.
Only because we have a station next to you. If we don't, the station is just flying down behind your backyard.
We have to go to Gilroy or downtown.
Well, and there's also Caltrain stations in between, so I don't want to take away from that either. But ultimately, there's kind of, so if there are impacts from the program, right, there's, if we end up eating properly, right, there's eminent domain for those kinds of things. There's also processes in terms of if the homeowners feel that their property, has been basically hurt by the program, by the system, there are state processes of evaluating those kinds of things and then reaching an agreement on those. So that's part of it. Now, I'm not an expert frankly, on all of those, but that's part of the process. Yes, ma'am.
So I don't know exactly how to phrase the question, but I am kind of curious from a personal standpoint. We're in the process of looking at air conditioning, and one of the things we hear repeatedly is that you cannot have anything outside that's more than 70 decibels. And I know high speed's going to be. So there must be a city ordinance that says you guys can operate your trains to be above the 70 decibel levels. So you can't even do the air conditioning. So I'm just curious what city ordinance allows these trains to be louder than that, or if it's a federal jurisdiction. Yeah. Do you happen to know that answer?
James, I don't know if you have more of the background on sort of noise levels.
Coupled with that, going back to the speed issue, there's a speed limit of 45 miles an hour, I believe, on the tracks from Capitol to Brian. So how do we get to 110 running through that area if they're going to run great? That's another one tied into what she does.
Excuse me, I don't know of any speed ordinance. Any speed restriction may be because of slow speed track, maybe a tight radius turn, or something like that.
It's running right
residential, so it kind of gets noise.
Well, back to the first question about noise. What we really need to do is take the alignment, the UPRR alignment that Boris has been describing, and we need to really evaluate what that alignment looks like on a technical level. So again, just like the previous two alternatives that we had, the viaduct and the embankment option, we have to set a footprint. Now, because this footprint is inside the UPRR corridor, we're expecting it to take a lot less right away. But really, we'll take that footprint and we'll evaluate it from noise aspect. We're not changing any laws here for the noise, but when we do our noise analysis, the noise analysis may come up with noise mitigation strategies, such as noise barriers, or maybe some additional features, such as double painting people's windows or something like that. But that's how we're addressing the noise.
So that isn't really, but I guess I'm just wondering what ordinance allows, they won't allow a homeowner to put an air conditioning unit next to the house that's more than 70 decibels. So even with the noise mitigation, if it is over 70 decibels, what's the city ordinance or the federal jurisdiction that says, oh, that's acceptable for a train, even though it's not acceptable for homeowners and air conditioning?
Right, our noise mitigation experts are evaluating that. But you're right about the noise ordinance. We cannot go above that level. So we do have mitigation techniques to reduce the noise.
So no matter what, there's no scenario where coming up to our house, which will be right behind us, it would be above 70 decibels.
That's what we're designing for. At this speed, really a lot of the noise comes, we're not going to get the heavy engine noise that a freight train is going to get. A lot of the noise comes from the wind of the high-speed rail just passing through the air. And at 110 miles per hour, that noise, it's relatively not that high.
So it would be below 70. When I'm outside, it has to be below 70 decibels. You guys are entitled.
Right. If there's a issue with horns, then like we mentioned previously, then the city has the option for applying for the focused horns.
The what? The horns?
We are already in a quiet zone. From Coyote Valley up past Bernal. Right. So they are not allowed to blow their horns in that area. We've already, it was applied for when the Bernal overpass was created. So you don't have the horns aren't the issue. It's the speed and the impact.
And if we can't have air conditionings that are above 70, I just want to be sure that no matter what, the noise is under 70 decibels. Because that's what the city ordinance is for homeowners. Are you guys have to follow that law, or do you not have to adhere to the laws?
I think we're going to have to come back and have more information on the noise, frankly. I don't know that we have the answer for you right now. I'd like to get you an answer. And so,
I have the answer. When you get Fresno, you change the window. And that is not an option for us.
No, but that's not an option anyway.
That's what they're doing.
But I'm
that's
going
the
to
mitigation
outside.
they're giving in Fresno.
Right.
That is a mitigation. The high school rail is doing in Fresno.
it's very individual, right? It's very individual from place to place. Noise impacts really depends on the distance, on the speeds. There's a lot of different variables. So I just don't want to give you bad information. I would rather come back and give you better information later, because I don't think we know the exact answer to your question. And so it's not that I don't want to answer your question. I just want to make sure we're giving you good information. So
when will
if you'll allow us
that
to do
information be available?
For the draft environmental document, it'll be available. So on our project timeline right now, we're looking to have a draft environmental document by November of 2019.
So before that, it'll be available.
Correct. And then I think the other part, this question of noise also came up at the community working group meeting. I know, I wasn't there, but I think there was a previous community working group meeting last year where the question of noise was also a lot of information was provided on that. So we can go back and look at some of, what was provided at that time, what more we can say, and kind of when we'll be able to answer those questions.
So in response, I'm part of that community working group. I'm the one.
You asked the question there.
And continually, it has been stated that you guys have a sound booth down in the south that you're going to bring up, that we can listen and actually hear what the sound train is going to be like. And then I've asked since then, and the response is always, there's issues transporting it up to the north. So are you going to be able to get that sound booth up here at any of these community working groups?
Let me answer the question. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to dodge your question. I'm taking your question very seriously. And I know you're on the community working group. We know how to reach you. So, I hear the question. I really do. So
I'm flying you guys.
That's not going to be necessary. So.
It might be.
When we find that you have options to choose from, and you have options, will there be a way for communities that voice their influence that in some way?
Yes. So as we're kind of going through that process of picking a preferred alternative, and as we go into the draft environmental document and then into the final, as all of those kind of advance, there will be a lot of opportunities for the community to weigh in. We'll be back in terms of community meetings and presentations, a lot more detail than obviously what I have today, as we get through and look at those in more detail. So yes, there'll be opportunities for that. Well, we look at the comments that we receive, and so we certainly take those into strong consideration. We respond to every comment as part of the environmental documents that we get. So that's part of the process. So
that was also part of my question: communication from the public forum and opinions. You prepare this with the State Department of Transportation. Is that correct?
With the California High Speed Rail Authority.
Develops communication with the legislature. Is that how it works? All the information, the opinions, you develop it, and you send it somewhere for someone to look at.
Can I just go ahead and just describe the environmental process for us for just one quick second? So the question was, how does the community opinions get wrapped up into the final decision for the high-speed rail? So it's actually quite a complicated process when we evaluate these options. Our environmental document has 17 chapters, ranging all the way from impacts to wildlife, to noise, to biology, air quality, traffic, everything. And so the community opinions, the community impacts, that's one piece of the puzzle. It's a very important piece of the puzzle that we take very seriously, but it really has to be considered amongst all these other technical elements for the project. Once we get to a preferred alternative that happens before the draft environmental document comes out, we'll come back out to the communities to present that preferred alternative and then gather any feedback and gather any opinions that you have on the preferred alternative. Once you get to the draft environmental document, you have another opportunity to comment on the environmental document and make your opinions known.
And then it goes to the committee at the state level.
So in terms of how the final stages in the process are, so the agency that we work for is the California High-Speed Rail Authority. We have a board of directors we're a state agency. We have a board of directors that is appointed by the governor and the members of the legislature, and ultimately they're the ones who certify the state environmental documents, and then the federal government certifies the federal environmental documents. So there's kind of two elements, and in terms of those key decisions, like the preferred alternative, ultimately it's made by our board of directors.
And then it goes to the transportation committee at the state level.
That's where the decision gets made. So it's
you make
our board of directors makes that decision. Yes, ma'am.
So when are the city proposals are going to become prepared to be studied by the students?
I'm sorry, there's a little bit of whispering. I'm having trouble hearing your question.
Okay. So when you decide you have the preferred alternative, that is the one that will be studied in the near future. So when are the city proposals, the two proposals that we have, are going to be part of the study with the engineers? When is that going to happen?
So basically the questions about how we study a range of alternatives and where the city options would come into that. So as I mentioned, so we've done work on 3 alternatives that's advanced kind of quite a bit further. So what we're doing now is looking at kind of what we've introduced in the UP corridor. That's kind of the concept I laid out. We're looking at what the city has introduced, and we're trying to figure out the path forward in terms of what more we're going to be studying. We're looking at kind of what are the objectives, what are the outcomes that are trying to be achieved, and then there will be a decision about how we collectively move forward.
So when is that decision going to be done? When are you going to study the city and decide that those are going to go forward or not? And we want to know what the requirements are and why are they going forward or why they are not. And we want to have a decision about the city because that's the one that we want. And we don't want you guys just to take it away because you may say that it's cost. That is not right. That is not, just because you don't get the funding, you're not going to do something that is good for the community.
Well, we have to.
So what I'm saying is, as a community, we want to know exactly what are you going to say about the cities.
I think as a community, I want to know what we're sacrificing. What is the city of San Jose sacrificing? It's by far the biggest on the circuit up there. It seems to me like we are giving up far more than anybody else, including San Francisco, than what we're receiving. The demographic, who are going to be riding these trains from the Central Valley to the Bay Area? And where are they going to be going to?
Well, as we're see,
it seems to me that San Jose is a flyover city. But yet we're giving up more than any other community. What is San Francisco giving up? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. There's already a right-of-way there. But yet they'll probably benefit the most. When I'm looking at this map, I see dishwashers, I see service class jobs leaving Bakersfield and going into San Francisco, or maybe they're bathroom cleaners to clean up the bathrooms of Salesforce or Facebook.
No, because they won't have $20,000 a year to pay for
no,
tickets.
But the city of San Jose,
the tickets are going to be $45
one way. It's the per capita cost. You take every man, woman, child in California over the next 30 years, how much money will we have paid to this system? That will probably be half finished. What is it, about $20,000 over 20 years? What is it? For every man, woman, child in California. The point is, it just seems to me like the people on the peninsula are paying very little into the system. They're going to benefit the most. The city of San Jose has to be responsible for this. We can't allow them to tear up a neighborhood for the sake of Mountain View, Monterey, San Francisco. We can't let that happen. All right? And I don't care if it costs the money you're going to lose in cap and trade. If it costs an extra $10 million, so be it. And if you can't find the money, move it out of San Jose. We don't need it. We don't need it for Google that may or may not be in near the Jordan station. That's pie in the sky crap. The only reason we're here is because of that pie in the sky dream of Jerry Brown, excuse me. I was thinking about his dad. It's ludicrous. It's just absolutely critical when you consider the cost, especially with San Jose. San Jose is getting nothing from this. Absolutely nothing. And we are sacrificing by far the most. You know that to be true. You should.
Let me just give one part of the answer. And I hear you, sir. Look, I get the frustration. And we certainly look at San Jose as being one of the key hubs on the system.
It is
absolutely. It is in Northern California in terms of what's happening in
It seems like you're telling San Jose what you're going to do.
Yeah,
I'm not listening.
And maybe paying a few $1,000s to, what's the mayor's name, Ricardo? Just so he can say, hey, we're bringing Google in. Or maybe you're paying him $10,000. I don't know. But to me, it doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem like, at the very minimum, there seems to be a little fiscal insight or responsibility. There needs to be a man in the room. Jesus. I don't know. I don't think we need to shove down our throat because Jerry Brown says it's got to be done. It's my legacy. My legacy is nothing without this train. I would feel a lot better if Facebook would step up and maybe contribute $1 billion. Google, the people that are really going to benefit from it. But it seems like San Jose is, the citizens of San Jose from Mendocino County down to San Diego. I mean, it's $2,000 a year. I don't know. What is it? $2,000 a year being seen building for every tax-paying citizen? It's a lot of money. A lot of money. And there's a lot of other things going on in the state that is using resources.
And the city is gonna do copy. We put a viaduct there.
The whole southern part of the city is going to suffer for it. And we have a housing crisis. There's no reason we need to basically turn up a third of our city to accommodate this thing that is going to just rampage through our city.
I thought San Jose was supposed to be a nice city. We're making it pretty in different ways. And now you come here and you build a viaduct? That's not right.
They're talking about not building a viaduct.
No, that's what it's going to be. If they don't go to the city, the two city options, those are nice. They are going to tell them that they don't have the money.
They're going to tell them they don't have the cap and trade funds, so we have to build a viaduct.
Viaduct is pretty expensive too.
It's going to be a lot cheaper. It's going to be a lot cheaper than any other
They're going to end up doing that.
It's just a matter of building years. Every
let them address your question.
I mean, there's a lot said there, so I don't know which part of it. But look, I mean, here's maybe the way I can try to address this, because I hear some of the distrust that you have, and I'm not taking that lightly. Look, guys, I can't fix kind of past stuff. I'm sure that a lot of folks in this room have history with the project. I'm sure some of that has or hasn't been positive. I hear it. I hear it loud and clear from here and in the community. What we're trying to do is we're trying to do it right. We really are. We're trying to look at ways that we can minimize impacts, develop the system, be fiscally, work within our fiscal constraints. That is an important thing. We're still representing public funds. It's a public project that we're building. I'm not saying that doesn't mean that we can't make appropriate investments. That doesn't mean that we're not going to do the system in a way that benefits the city and the residents here. We really do view it as having very big benefits towards San Jose. in terms of the connections to the rest of the state that benefits both San Jose residents in terms of the ability to travel, get around, that also benefits San Jose businesses. And I don't know what part of it we are or aren't in terms of Google coming to downtown San Jose. There's also opinions of whether that's a good or bad thing. But it's a reason that that hub is really becoming the center of the Silicon Valley. Diridon Station in that area is really becoming a transportation hub. With us coming, with art coming, it's really transforming what that could be. And that does have big benefits from both our system and from the other things that, frankly, the city is also trying to do there. And so, look, I hear the frustration. We're not making decisions. We're trying to lay out where we're at and give you an honest perspective of what's on the table and what we've studied so far, what we are looking at, what the city's provided. That's what we're here for tonight. So. We're doing our best. Now, are we perfect? No, and I know that there's the history that I come in, I'm coming to the room with. So, but that's where we're at. I don't know if Brian wanted to add anything to that.
Just addressing a couple of points, like I said at the beginning of the presentation about the city-generated options. When High-Speed Rail decided they were going to go north first in 2016, the city has since then built up the capacity to deal with both high speed and BART coming at the same exact time. And we began to engage in the planning and process, review their plans, come to these public outreach meetings, and heard the concerns of city residents and city businesses. And the reason the city actually went out and didn't use high-speed rail money, but used city staff, city funds to hire the engineers and develop the city-generated options is because the city for over a decade has supported bringing high-speed rail through San Jose and through Pacheco Pass. Well, there's benefits, but the city also wants to protect the residents and community and business interests of the residents. So the city-generated option is how can we provide that increased service from high-speed rail and hopefully Caltrain and other services while protecting city residents' interests. And where we are right now is we provide that to high-speed rail. We're in discussions with that, but what the process is moving forward, we've just started discussions on, so there's no agreed-upon process between high-speed rail, the city, BTA, Caltrain, because it's really all of us involved, on how that's going to move forward. So I can't speak to what that process will be moving forward. We've done this work. We've provided options. We've reacted to the business plan concept. But we can't stand here today and say, oh, we've figured out what the roadmap is for coming to decisions on the range of alternatives. We have this process, we have this agreement, because we don't have that agreement yet. We're just starting this conversation.
What do you need from us residents to help you? What do you need from us residents to help you get your city options, to get your city options where you are? I mean, how can we support you to represent us? What can we do for you?
I mean, what I know as a city staff person is you can talk to your council members, you can talk to representatives at the city level, at the county level. These discussions are involving the city, VTA, Caltrain, and high-speed rail. So, your representatives at the city, county, state level, that's, encompasses all those organizations. Beyond that, I don't know what else I can say as a city staff person.
Well, let me just say this. You're asking Brian what you can do, but I just want to reiterate, we hear what you're saying here. There's a reason that I'm here, that parts of my team are here, and so I know you obviously use Brian and the city as part of your advocacy, but we hear what you're saying about the CGOs. We're not taking them lightly, and so that's part of our charge is to be part of that, those discussions and take them seriously. So, I don't know where else you want to, what the advocacy, that you're obviously able to do. But I just want to say from our side that we hear what this room is saying too. So.
Can I make a comment real quick before we take any other questions? It's about this and the charges that they're not being responsive. I'm on the community working group, and a small group of us in the Lisbon Sales Metcalf area invited out high-speed rail and city staff to Tulare Hill, and we took them for a walk out there and had them see what it is that is in jeopardy if they were to put a viaduct up. And I don't want to float my boat too much here, but I think the fact that I think we had some impact in along with other people who raised their concerns about the city even going out and spending the money to hire consultants to come up with their own options. And high-speed rail also, I think, realized that the viaduct is going to be an extremely unpopular option because they saw it for themselves what it would do to our beautiful area, right? I mean, you won't even see the hills on the other side, So they are being responsive. They can't tell us in that same meeting, okay, we'll cancel the viaduct. They can't do that. There's a whole process that's going through. But the fact that the city even came up with their own options, I think I want to commend the staff, especially John Risto and the others that came out to meet with us. Those options, they are being responsive. They are concerned about how this is going through. And one of the things I've raised at community working group meetings is that, because we're the largest city on this route so far, that we should be kind of the crown jewel. I want us to be the example of how high-speed rail and the city and the community all work together to come up with a world-class, system done the right way where all the impact are minimized as possible. And, I just think that it is frustrating, obviously, and to see the proposal and well, why didn't they think of this? Why didn't they think of that? A lot of the stuff I'm learning, they've already thought of it, 15 years ago before any of us were involved in this. So, but they are being responsive. It's going to be a long process. It's going to be a difficult process, but I think we've made it clear we don't have to buy it up. And honestly, I don't think it's not the cheapest option anymore. I think the Caltrain blended option probably is possibly the cheapest, or it's certainly the most beneficial for our area. That's the most likely to get cars off 101. That's going to be that's what San Jose gets out of this for the rest of the areas, right? Not in downtown, right? It's getting traffic off the roads. Because no matter what, we've got 30 more million people coming in the next 50 years or whatever.
And they're all moving to Gilroy.
Yeah, almost, right? And there's just no way, there's no way that we can build enough freeways to in fact, high-speed rails will be cheaper than building more freeways. So anyway, they've been responsive. I want to commend them publicly, and let's give them a chance to work through the process.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
The lady in the back asked a question quite a while ago, and that is, when will high-speed rail make a decision on the San Jose's proposal?
So that's it. Again, we're just starting down the process, so I don't have a final, I don't have an answer to that in terms of the final date. But I think that's something in the next few months. I think it's the next 6 months. No, I think it's going to be. I think we'll be there sooner than that. So I think it's the next few months is what I was.
Less than 6 months.
Yeah.
My question is on that same topic. Is the decision-making process, there's meetings between the two entities. Are those meetings open to the public, or will the discussions be publicized? The discussions, the body of discussions. And is that something that we are going to be able to have access to, or will we have to just wait for the decision?
So, these are pretty technical meetings. So we're doing that on the staff level, right? So we will be back with information about kind of where things are starting to form up as we get into trying to formalize an agreement. Obviously, that's part of all of those things will be public processes, and so we will have more information for the public, and as well as opportunities to hear from the public on these things.
So we'll be having access to that information maybe before a decision is made or after. That's what I'm wondering. Yeah. No.
I don't know. I don't know right now. We're just. I don't want to make you a false promise. So I'd rather say I don't know than to say it will be this, because I don't know what this is yet. So we're just. The business plan was adopted 3 weeks ago. We're just starting down the road. So I don't. I'd rather come back to the another answer.
Thank you.
My other question is, Because if you look at a plane, you think, okay, I can go to the airport, half an hour for security, an hour down to LA. Once I'm at the airport, I have options to rent all these different cars and go from there. Is that similar? Are you guys going to have all these hubs where we can rent cars at these different stations? Is it going to be have to take another train? Is that thing? Like, I'm failing to see how this is going to decrease our time to get from here to LA. I mean, I'm just failing to see it because by the time I get through security and on the plane, it's about the same time as driving from here to Darabont or here to the airport from where I live. So, what is the benefit of this versus the benefit of already just taking a plane which is already established, but they already can fill all those flights that they're building?
Sure. So in terms of the travel times and what it looks like, part of it is the security process for high-speed rail is different. So the TSA sets out sort of the security measures. So for airports, there's kind of quite stringent security measures. We've all been through it, take off your shoes, all that stuff. For high-speed rail, they look at, for rail in general, they look at it differently. And so our kind of security process, does, at least from what we have heard from TSA so far, isn't going to have to be the same way. So at least that speeds things up in terms of the kind of coming in. So you can really, basically show up much closer to when your train would leave. The other part of it, in terms of, and it really depends on the trip, right? In some cases, it depends where you might be going in other parts of the state in terms of, is a plane faster, is it cheaper? Those are going to be, that's part of the competitive market. So what we brought on is a private operator that's really going to be looking at how to compete against both air and against, cars driving. Most of the trips in California are made by car. So we certainly have big travel time savings compared to auto trips. Against air, if you're looking at some of these like really long distance markets, it really depends on what your ultimate destination looks like. In terms of ability to kind of the last mile access egress elements, those are obviously important components in terms of, both having various mobility options. I think that space is frankly changing quite a bit with both Uber, Lyft coming on in the last 5 years. That starts to change things. Autonomous vehicles might also be changing what those ultimately look like, but also there's major investments being made around some of these major hubs in other transit modes. So it will depend on any given trip, but we don't anticipate that we're going to capture 100% market share. That's not, we don't need 100% market share. Californians make over 500 million long-distance trips a year right now. There's a lot of travel that goes on. We're not talking about capturing huge percentages of that, but there are going to be specific markets and specific trips where we do have big advantages, and it'll be up to the private operator to really take it, to figure out where those places are and how to develop the system in terms of cost, in terms of schedules, and destinations, in terms of and where the trains go to capture that market. Okay, that makes sense.
How many trains are they anticipating north and south each day? Right now, the Amtrak is 2, one north, one south.
Right.
When you're talking, one of the problems is that if you need to go midday and there's only 2 trains, it's not going to happen. What's the schedule plan?
So we anticipate having much more regular service than that. That's part of why we're developing the system, is to be able to provide that kind of level of service. So in the valley-to-valley line, so what we're talking about kind of the starting point, what we've looked at as part of the business plan is essentially in the peak having 2 trains an hour, and in the off-peak having 1 train an hour throughout the day. So we're talking about roughly 22 round trips as sort of the initial service. Now that starts to ramp up as you get into extensions to Merced. You might run the service from Merced over. As you get into Los Angeles, you might continue to increase that service over time as the system gets built out. So, but it's really it's starting to get much more frequent regular service. But that's sort of our planning assumptions. Again, ultimately the operator will kind of figure out what makes sense. And so we haven't. That's kind of well ahead of us. But that's what we're assuming as part of the business plan.
So how is that going to work with being self-funded? So you're running 22 trains. For a good while, you're not going to have enough bodies to fill those trains and make it financially viable.
So the analysis that's been, so we look at basically, okay, with that level of service, what's the ridership that you could generate? And then from there, based on essentially an average ticket price, it's not a precise, precise kind of variation, but can the system cover its operating costs? And so the analysis in business plan kind of has laid out that it can. Based on that, I mean, again, that's kind of what the numbers come out as. But ultimately, the private operator will make that decision, right? Maybe there's more service that makes sense.
There's public?
Yes, that's all in the business plan. And so you can look at that. There's summary level information in the business plan. There's technical reports behind it where you can look at all those figures.
I think we should wrap it up. Thanks for all the questions. So I just want to say thanks for everybody for coming, and thanks to Boris Lipkin and Brian Stanke and James Tung for presenting the information, answering the questions, taking the heat. I wanted to also ask a couple questions just to kind of get a feel for the room. So one of the questions is, first of all, we're this meeting's hosted by Los Paseos Neighborhood Association, and I'm a board member. Greg Peck doing photography is a board member. Amy in the back there is a board member, and Barbara Knapp at the desk is a board member. So we were just curious how many Los Paseos residents are in the room. So we can get quite a few. And then I was curious how many people live really close to the Monterey corridor, like, within half a block. Right across the street. Right across the street. And then how many of you folks would prefer the city-generated options over the blended system? The city-generated options, neither of them are elevated, and the blended system is not elevated either. So I was curious. So I think that wraps it up. Greg, do you have anything else that you want to say? And we appreciate you guys coming out and getting engaged, and it's really important to stay engaged. We try to, there's a few of us here that are on the community working group. We try to send out information once we have the meetings. We try to get people information to get engaged. So we appreciate you doing that, and we'll. If you signed your email up on the list, then we'll send you emails to let you know about things. And I guess that's it. Thank you very much.
Just the last one, I just want to say thank you for those who took the time. And, I just want to say thanks to Karen for organizing this and inviting us to come. We do appreciate the opportunity to hear from you, and I think we'll be back as long as you'll have us. and more information to go. Thank you again.
Thank you.
We'll stay behind for any questions.
On behalf of the city of Orange, thanks for the invitation, and thanks for